Well, good day, everybody, and welcome to the Consciousness edition of 5-Minute Psych. In this 5-minute segment, we'll explore what consciousness is before looking at different levels of consciousness. Then we'll consider different views of the unconscious, and we'll end with a discussion of the brain areas that are important for consciousness. Of all the millions of things going on around us and inside us at any given moment, consciousness is whatever we're thinking about or whatever our attention is on. As such, we can formally define consciousness as our present awareness of ourselves and our surroundings. Several characteristics of consciousness naturally emerge from this definition. First, consciousness is subjective and private, meaning that others can't know our inner reality, and vice versa. We can't be sure of the inner reality of others. Consciousness is also ever changing throughout the day. Not only do we drift in and out of different states of consciousness all day, like alert, drowsy, daydreaming, sleeping, but we also focus on different things all the time. William James in the early 1900s described consciousness as a stream, and this is exactly what he meant, how it's dynamic. Finally, consciousness is self-reflective in the sense that we can reflect on our own mind and exert some control over it. Theorists discussing consciousness often refer to different levels of consciousness. The consciousness level consists of whatever's in your mind right at this moment, like watching this video. Pre-consciousness includes stuff that you're not thinking about right this second, but you could easily access it and bring it into the level of consciousness. For example, if I asked you what you had for supper last night, chances are this wasn't what you were thinking about right before I asked you, but you could recall it and then bring it into consciousness. Finally, there's the unconscious. This is where we keep stuff that we're completely unaware of, and it's really difficult to bring that stuff back into consciousness. The ideas surrounding what the unconscious is and whether it exists at all have been controversial since Freud's time in the early 1900s. Freud argued that the unconscious is full of thoughts and memories that are too painful for our conscious mind to handle. Things like unacceptable urges and traumatic memories. Freud believed that part of our mental energy would constantly go to keeping this stuff hidden from ourselves. However, he said that sometimes the contents could slip into consciousness, either through a dream or a slip of the tongue. There's very little supportive evidence for Freud's ideas, but more recently, cognitive psychologists have revisited the idea of the unconscious. Instead of thinking of it like being full of repressed urges, it's viewed as two different ways of processing information: consciously, or with effort and intention, or unconsciously, meaning without effort or intention. A great example of this continuum is learning how to drive. Remember the first time you drove? I felt like it was information overload. I couldn't pay attention to my speed, mirrors, the road, steering, all at the same time. It took all of my focus to drive. Now I'm an experienced driver, so it's completely different. I do it automatically. The task of driving that used to take so much of my mental effort has been switched to an unconscious one. And most of my drive happens without my awareness of my speed, mirrors, or steering. We can't point to a consciousness center in the brain, but instead it's thought to occur in networks throughout the brain. Nonetheless, we know about two brain areas that are especially important for consciousness. The first is the thalamus, which is a structure in the middle of the brain that relays sensory information to and from higher brain areas. But without certain areas of the thalamus, we lose consciousness and fall into a coma. The other important brain region is the cerebral cortex, or the thin 3-millimeter outer covering of the brain. The cerebral cortex is responsible for being aware of our attention. For instance, patients with blind sight have a fully functional visual cortex, and yet they report that they're completely blind. The thing is that they don't have any awareness of the visual input. So even though their visual cortex is lighting up properly, because they have no awareness of it, they experience blindness. Well, we just looked at what consciousness is before exploring the different levels of consciousness. We then turned to the controversial unconscious before examining the brain regions that are intimately linked with consciousness. Now, aren't you glad you had 5 minutes?